One stormy night, a disgraced officer was driving home with more weight than any man should bear. A reputation in ruins, a leg that never fully healed, and a little girl waiting for him, counting on him to keep her world together. The rain hammered the windshield like the sky was trying to erase him. Then he saw it. A car stranded on the roadside, a woman standing alone in the downpour, a child inside, struggling for breath through the smoke filling the cabin. He could have kept driving. Maybe he should have, after everything life had taken from him. But something deep inside refused to abandon them. He didn't know that stopping in that storm would unravel the truth behind the betrayal that shattered his life and lead him toward the healing, purpose, and unexpected family he never thought he'd find again.
Come on, son.
Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from. And if you enjoy this story, don't forget to subscribe. The fog moved slowly that morning, like an old memory trying to find its way back. Daniel Hayes stood at the window of the small rental house, listening to the ocean breathe against the shore. At 40, he carried the heaviness of a man older, short, dark hair touched by fatigue, light stubble, and eyes that had seen too much, too fast. His Navy police uniform hung on him like a reminder of everything he'd lost. The limp in his right leg was sharper today, colder weather settling into the old wound from Harbor Clinic. In the dim kitchen behind him, Lily slept curled on the couch, her tiny form under a yellow blanket. 8 years old, brown hair spilling over her cheek, wearing the same hoodie she'd insisted on wearing to bed. Sometimes Daniel wondered how someone so small could hold so much of his heart. Sometimes he wondered how much longer he could carry both of them. He poured himself a cup of coffee, thin, bitter, but warm, and sat quietly at the edge of the table. The house creaked with the kind of loneliness only coastal towns knew. Gray Ridge was beautiful in a way, the sound of gulls, the pale dawn light brushing the rooftops, the calm sea. But for Daniel, it felt like exile, a place people were sent when others didn't want to see them anymore. He had once been a respected investigator, sharp and steady, until the Harbor Clinic shooting, until the bullet carved through his leg, until his partner bled out in his arms, until the accusations came, quiet at first, then louder, then everywhere. A man could survive a wound, but surviving suspicion, that was different. When his sister died suddenly 2 months ago, leaving Lily with nowhere else to go, the world seemed to fold in on itself. Nights were longer, money thinner, grief heavier, and the silence, oh, the silence, cut the deepest. Outside, neighbors passed on the sidewalk. Daniel caught their glances through the window, quick, cautious, soaked in pity or judgment. He knew their whispers, felt them more than heard them. The disgraced cop, the one who got his partner killed, the man raising a child all alone. Sometimes he thought the wind carried those words more clearly than anything else in this town. But there was one creature who never looked away. Max. The 5-year-old German shepherd lifted his head from the rug, black and tan fur catching the light. No collar, no badges, just a loyal soul with bright, watchful eyes. Once labeled too aggressive by the unit, cast aside. Yet Max moved toward Daniel with a gentleness that felt like a balm. Daniel rested his hand on the dog's head. "You're the only one who still believes in me," he murmured. Max leaned in, breathing slow and steady, like he was trying to anchor Daniel to the world. When the kettle clicked off, Daniel opened the drawer for a spoon. His fingers brushed a thin envelope, creased, yellowed at the edges. The anonymous email printed inside had haunted him for months. "You are not the only one who knows the truth about Harbor Clinic." He didn't know who sent it, or why. Only that it was the first spark of hope he'd felt since that night, a small, stubborn ember refusing to die. Daniel closed the drawer gently, listening to Lily's soft breathing, Max's quiet sigh, and the distant echo of seagulls. For the first time in a long while, he allowed himself a fragile thought. Maybe he wasn't entirely alone after all. The rain came in sheets that night, drifting like smoke across the empty road. The storm had settled over Grayridge in a low, unbroken hum. Wind pushed against the old patrol car as Daniel drove the coastal highway, his eyes heavy from another long shift. Max sat upright in the back seat, the 5-year-old German Shepherd alert in a way only dogs sensing trouble could be. Daniel's breath fogged the glass as he slowed near a bend where a stalled SUV blinked weakly through the rain. The world felt muffled, only the thrum of the storm, the faint hiss of the tires, and the quiet ache in his leg remained. He stepped out into the cold, the kind of cold that found its way into bones and memories alike. A woman stood beside the SUV, soaked through her work blouse and charcoal blazer. She looked to be mid-30s, sharp features softened by panic, hair plastered to her cheeks. When she saw Daniel, her voice trembled, clear yet fractured by fear. "My son, he's not breathing right." Her hands shook in that helpless way only a parent's could. Daniel opened the back door, but Max reached the boy first. Jackson, a small 10-year-old with pale skin and blonde hair, was slumped in the seat, coughing through the thin smoke from a flooded engine. Max climbed in with astonishing care, nudging the child upright with his nose, then pressing his warm body along the boy's side. The child's small hands tangled instinctively in Max's fur. His breathing steadied, little by little. The storm roared on, but inside that car, something softened. Kate, her breath catching, her suit dripping onto the gravel, watched with her hand over her mouth. She whispered, "Thank you. I don't know what I would have done." Her voice carried both strength and exhaustion, like a woman who'd been holding her world together for far too long. Daniel checked the boy's pulse, then turned to her gently. "He's okay, just scared. Max has that effect. He finds people who need him." For a moment, they stood in the rain, all three breathing the same cold air, shadows flickering in the flashing hazard lights. Once the boy was safe, Daniel crouched beneath the SUV's hood. Water dripped from his hair, tracing the lines of worry carved into his face. Old habits returned, small, practical motions learned over years. He used the same duct tape that held half his own life together, sealing a cracked hose just long enough to get them to town. Kate watched him with quiet intensity, her arms wrapped around herself, not just for warmth, but for grounding. When he finished, she reached for her purse, shaking. "Please, at least let me pay you?" Daniel shook his head, wiping rain from his brow with the back of his hand. "Keeping your son safe is enough." She hesitated, then offered her name in a soft breath. "I'm Kate." Daniel gave a small, tired smile. "Daniel?" He didn't notice the glint of a badge in her coat pocket. Department of Justice, State, Division? Nor the way she studied his face, as if something about him echoed a story she'd heard once, whispered between courtroom walls. The rain eased, but the moment lingered, quiet, fragile, unforgettable. Morning light drifted through thin clouds, pale and unsure, like someone learning how to breathe again. The meeting room at Grayridge Station smelled faintly of old wood and burnt coffee. Daniel sat near the back, his navy uniform stiff from the early shift, his leg aching as it always did when a storm had recently passed. Officers shuffled in quietly, boots echoing on the worn floor. Max lay at Daniel's feet, the 5-year-old German Shepherd, calm but alert, ears flicking at every sound. A sense of unease hung in the room, something unspoken, something heavy. When the door opened, a group of officials stepped inside. At the front was a woman in a charcoal suit, early 30s, posture straight despite clear exhaustion. Kate Lawson. She moved with focused purpose, papers held against her chest, dark hair tied back neatly. Daniel felt a slow pull in his stomach, a memory of rain and fear and her trembling voice. She did not look his way, not even once. Kate spoke with a steady, low voice, measured, clear, carrying the weight of someone who had seen too much too young. "The Special Review Task Force is reopening cases flagged for inconsistencies," she said, her gaze sweeping across rows of skeptical faces. "One of those is the Harbor Clinic case." A murmur broke through the room. Daniel felt his pulse throb in his neck. The projector flickered, showing documents, timelines, scattered pieces of a life he wished he could forget. Then the next slide appeared, and his breath caught. His own name stretched across the screen. Cold, clinical, detached. Kate paused, as if choosing silence over opinion, and then continued her briefing as though she had never met him on a rain-soaked road. Inside, something fragile shifted in Daniel, a mixture of hope and dread. Max pressed his head against Daniel's boot, sensing the tremor in him. Around them, chairs creaked, whispers rose, and Daniel remained still as stone. Later, while the station emptied, Kate stayed behind in the conference room, bathed in the hum of fluorescent light. Her fingers brushed through pages of the Harbor Clinic file, pages worn from too many hands, but too few honest eyes. She discovered an internal memo from years earlier, a request from Daniel's fallen partner, asking to testify as a witness. The note beside it read, "Rejected. Internal conflict." Kate's jaw tightened. The rejection was no coincidence. She recognized the pattern: politics, pressure, someone silencing truths that shouldn't have been buried. And she recognized something else, the quiet strength in Daniel that night in the rain. A man broken, yet still gentle, still trying. She closed the folder softly, as if not to wake an old wound. Outside the glass wall, Daniel walked past, limping slightly, Max at his side. Kate watched him go, her eyes shadowed with a private resolve. She would not speak of their meeting. Not yet. But somewhere deep inside her, a quiet promise formed. A promise to understand what truly happened at Harbor Clinic. Dust floated in thin sunlight, drifting like old secrets waking from sleep. The evidence storage building stood behind the station, a small structure of warped boards and peeling paint that smelled of damp paper and forgotten years. Daniel walked in slowly, his limp more noticeable after a morning of patrol. Max padded beside him, the 5-year-old German shepherd moving with quiet certainty, nose low, ears forward. Inside, the air was still, thick with the scent of cardboard, rusted metal shelves, and the faint sweetness of mold. Daniel pulled on a pair of gloves and began lifting old boxes, some dating back decades. His breath echoed in the narrow room, steady but weary. After everything that had happened, the task felt like another reminder of how far he'd fallen from the work he once loved. Yet he told himself he was here to do his part, however small. Max sniffed the corners carefully, pausing sometimes as if sensing echoes. Daniel could not. In the silence, Daniel found himself whispering, "If there's anything left to find, show me." Max seemed to understand. Perhaps dogs always understood more than people expected. It happened near the back wall, where the light dimmed into a gray pocket. Max stiffened, tail low but alert. He stepped toward an unmarked cardboard box wedged behind a stack of old evidence logs. His paws scratched lightly, 3 slow taps, then a pause, then another. Daniel knew that sound. It was how Max signaled something wasn't right. "Easy, boy," Daniel murmured, his voice roughened by the stale air. He dragged the box forward. Dust rose in a soft cloud around them. Inside, mixed with loose papers, was a small external hard drive wrapped in a sheet of cloudy nylon. No barcode, no case number, no entry in the evidence index. Daniel felt a coldness move through him. Not fear exactly, but recognition. The kind that sits in a man's chest when he realizes something had been hidden on purpose. Something someone never intended to be found. He lifted the drive carefully, turning it over in his gloved hands. Max pressed closer, eyes shining with the quiet intensity only a dog with purpose could hold. Kate arrived a few minutes later, summoned by Daniel's terse radio call. She stepped inside, wearing a navy field jacket instead of her usual blazer, her dark hair tied back, exhaustion shadowing her eyes but not dimming their clarity. She studied the box, then the drive, her lips tightening. This wasn't on the manifest. Her voice was soft, steady, but laced with an undertow of anger. She ordered the room sealed and the contents inventoried. When the tech investigator, an older man named Harris with silver hair and a calm, tired face, plugged the drive into his isolated system, lines of encrypted code filled the screen. "It's heavily locked," he said, leaning closer. "Whatever's in here, someone didn't want it opened." Kate folded her arms, breathing slowly. The faint hum of the old computer mixed with the distant bark of Max outside, pacing with restless energy. Harris spoke again, this time almost in a whisper. "If we crack this, it could change everything about the Harbor Clinic case." The words hung in the stillness, settling into Daniel like a slow, painful hope. He looked toward the doorway where Max's silhouette waited in the fading light, as if guarding not just a building, but a truth finally stirring beneath the dust. The warehouse district lay quiet under a pale gray sky, the kind that made sound travel farther than it should. Daniel stepped out of the patrol car, boots crunching against gravel, still damp from last night's drizzle. Max walked at his side, the 5-year-old German shepherd steady and alert, nose twitching at every shift in the wind. The abandoned warehouses stretched along the road like a row of tired giants, their metal siding rusted, their windows clouded with dust and years. Daniel felt the weight of the morning settle in his chest. Ever since the news broke that the Harbor Clinic case had been reopened, the station hummed with unease. And one man in particular walked like a storm about to break. Mark Denny, mid-40s, tall, square shoulders, tactical gear always too tight across his chest, stood near the entrance. His jaw was clenched, hair clipped close, expression unreadable. He greeted no one, not even Daniel. And that silence said more than words could. Max's ears flattened slightly. Even he remembered Denny's voice. They'd been checking the old storage bays for signs of activity when it happened. A sharp pop, too small to be a full detonation, but enough to rattle nerves, echoed through the building. Dust drifted from the rafters like shaken memory. Max reacted first, muscles tight, bark deep but controlled. He lunged toward the sound, and Daniel followed, limping but determined. A shadow slipped between crates, gone in a heartbeat. Another officer, a young man named Riley, caught the worst of the shrapnel, just scratches, but enough to spark panic. Denny arrived seconds later, boots pounding, face hardening as he took in the scene. "Your dog's out of control, Hayes," he snapped, not bothering to hide the venom. Daniel knelt beside Max, who stood trembling with adrenaline but calm under his touch. "He did what he's trained to do," Daniel said softly. But Denny stepped closer, eyes narrowing. It wasn't about the dog. It never was. When the others dispersed, Denny approached Daniel alone, his voice dropping into something colder than the warehouse air. "That little girl you're raising?" he murmured. "Lily, right? Shame she's living in that rundown part of town. Dangerous place for a kid." The words slipped from him like poison, soft and deliberate. Daniel felt his breath catch, not in fear, but in the slow, rising fury of a man who had already lost too much. His fingers curled into a fist at his side, knuckles whitening, but he stayed still. Because men like Denny wanted him to break. And he wouldn't give him that. Later, Denny filed a formal complaint recommending Max be removed from duty. For aggression, for risk, for things that weren't true. Daniel read the report in silence, Max's warm body pressed to his leg as if sensing the storm inside him. He signed a request immediately. If Max is removed, He comes with me." Kate witnessed the exchange from across the QC hallway. Daniel standing tall despite the tremor in his hands, Max leaning into him like a promise. Her eyes softened with something deeper than professional concern. It was the kind of understanding that formed when two lives briefly intersected on a rainy road and recognized the quiet goodness in each other. She turned away, shaken by her own reaction. But she walked with new resolve, because a man who loved a child and a dog with this kind of fierce gentleness was not a man who betrayed his partner. And she would not let the truth stay buried in shadows any longer. The storm began with a low rumble, like the earth exhaling after holding breath too long. Rain swept across Grayridge in long silver veils, blurring the streetlights and turning the small houses along Harbor Road into faint shapes behind trembling glass. Daniel drove slowly through the dark, the wipers struggling against the downpour. Max sat in the passenger seat, his thick black and tan coat damp from earlier calls, amber eyes steady as if reading the weather the way other creatures read faces. A blackout had rolled through the town an hour ago, plunging everything into a strange, humming quiet. Daniel felt it in his bones, the unease, the memory of another night when lights had failed and men had died. His phone cracked through the silence. A frantic mother, a missing boy. A car found abandoned near the shore, the same road where Harbor Clinic had burned itself into his life. Daniel didn't think. He simply turned the wheel, breath tightening in his chest. Max lifted his head, sensing the shift. Outside, thunder rolled again, closer this time. The warehouse sat at the edge of the sea, a lonely shape against the roaring wind. Rain drummed against its rusted siding like impatient fingers. Daniel pushed the door open with his shoulder, flashlight trembling slightly in his hand. Max moved ahead, nose low, paws silent on the wet concrete. The smell of salt, mildew, and something metallic filled the air. A faint whimper bled through the dark. Daniel followed it into a locked storage room, his heartbeat suddenly loud. He broke the latch with a force he didn't know he still had. Inside, a small boy, no more than 10, lay tied to a chair, cheeks streaked with tears, a strip of duct tape muffling his cries. A laptop on a crate beside him was erasing files line by line, screens flickering with the last breaths of hidden truth. But the boy was not the only one waiting. Mark Denny stepped from the shadows, his face pale under the trembling beam of Daniel's flashlight. The man looked older tonight, 45, heavy set, dark uniform soaked, jaw tight with desperation. "You should have stayed quiet," he growled. "Like your partner did. I took care of him. I'll take care of you, too." The gunshot came like a crack in the universe. Daniel barely registered the flash. Max moved first, a streak of muscle and loyalty, throwing himself between the bullet and the child. The sound of impact echoed off the metal walls. Max stumbled, a deep cry tearing from his chest, his shoulder blooming red beneath the fur. But he stayed on his feet, teeth bared, body angled to shield Daniel as Denny raised the weapon again. Time slowed, stretched, bent itself around a single breath. Daniel felt something old inside him break loose, a grief he'd buried, a promise he'd failed, a debt he still owed. His hand rose, steady for the first time in months. The shot he fired hit Denny's wrist, sending the gun skittering across the floor. The room went still. Then Daniel was on his knees beside Max, hands shaking as he pressed against the wound. Rainwater dripped from the broken roof, mixing with blood. The boy crawled to Max, small fingers clutching the dog's ear as he sobbed into the thick fur. Max's tail thumped once, slow and brave. Daniel bent his forehead to Max's neck, whispering, "I'm here. You did good, buddy. You held the line." And for a moment the storm outside felt quiet, as if honoring all three of them. The morning broke gently, pale gold slipping through thin clouds like a hand smoothing old paper. The courthouse in Grey Ridge was a modest brick building, the kind built long before anyone imagined computers or digital evidence. Its halls smelled of polished wood and distant rain, a comforting mixture that reminded Daniel of his father's old study. He walked slowly beneath the high ceilings, his legs stiff from the stormy night before. The bandage beneath his uniform tugged with each step, but he didn't mind. Max wasn't with him today, still resting at the small veterinary clinic, recovering from surgery. But Daniel could almost hear the dogs breathing beside him, steady and loyal as ever. Kate waited near the entrance of the hearing chamber, dressed in a dark blazer, her hair tied back neatly. There was a quiet strength in her eyes, softened by exhaustion, yet sharpened by conviction. She offered him a small nod. No words were needed. Some truths only required presence. Inside, the room was dim except for a single window where sunlight pooled on the wooden floor. The special committee sat at the long table, papers stacked before them. Screens were set up to play the decrypted footage, the footage Max had unknowingly dug back into Daniel's life. When the video began, the faint hum of the speakers filled the silence. There, in grainy color, stood Mark Denny in the Harbor Clinic storage room before the alarm sounded that night years ago. He moved calmly, checking his watch, then unlocking cabinets. As the minutes ticked on, it became undeniable. He had been there to stage the crime. Money exchanged. Orders given. Betrayal set in motion. A low murmur swept through the chamber. Daniel sat straight, hands clasped, jaw tight. He felt no triumph. Only a slow, painful release, like exhaling a breath he had held for too many years. Kate stepped forward, voice steady, each word shaped by quiet fire. She spoke of the officer who died, Daniel's partner, a man who had tried to file a testimony that was buried by internal reasons. She described the distorted reports, the missing evidence logs, the fabricated accusations, and the years Daniel had spent living beneath shadows that did not belong to him. "He did not betray his badge," she said softly, her eyes resting briefly on Daniel. "He carried its weight, even when the badge stopped carrying him." The room fell silent as the committee deliberated. Outside, the rain eased to a faint whisper against the window, as if listening. When the ruling came, it was almost gentle. All accusations removed, full rank restored, an invitation to lead the new K-9 unit. Daniel closed his eyes for a moment, feeling something unfamiliar settle in his chest. Peace, maybe, or the beginning of it. Later that afternoon, Daniel stood beside Max's recovery kennel. The German shepherd lifted his head slowly, tired but alive, golden eyes warm with recognition. Max's fur was shaved around the wound, bandaged carefully. Daniel rested his forehead against the cool metal bars, breathing in the scent of antiseptic and wet fur. "You brought the truth home," he whispered. Max's tail thumped once, soft and brave. Moments later, the clinic staff walked in with a small velvet box. Inside, a medal engraved for courage. Daniel didn't look at the committee's letter or the commendation pinned with pride. He only looked at Max. In that quiet room with humming lights and the steady rhythm of a dog's breathing, Daniel felt the world align again, slowly, tenderly, like dawn returning to a long-forgotten coast. The afternoon sun lay warm over the field, soft as a hand resting on a tired shoulder. The grass swayed gently behind the Grey Ridge Community Center, bending to a breeze that carried the faint scent of pine and ocean salt. Daniel stood by the wooden fence, hands tucked into the pockets of his navy jacket. Months had passed since the night of the storm, months of quiet rebuilding, inside the town, inside himself. His limp was still there, a subtle reminder in the way he shifted his weight, but the heaviness in his chest had begun to ease. Max trotted across the yard, his coat grown full again, a pale scar hidden beneath thick fur. The children gathered for the therapy program, 8 to 12 years old, each carrying their own stories, waited for him with a mix of hope and shyness. When Max reached them, he lowered himself gently, letting small hands ruffle his ears. His tail swept the ground in slow, steady arcs. Watching them, Daniel felt something settle in him, a belief that healing wasn't loud. It was quiet, patient, shaped by presence rather than words. Lily ran across the field with her usual bright energy, the sun catching in her hair. She had grown in the past months, not in inches, but in confidence. The dark circles under her eyes had faded, replaced by a glow that only safety and belonging could give. She knelt beside Max, whispering something into his fur that made his ears twitch. When she turned toward Daniel, her smile was wide and unguarded. "They love him," she said proudly, "just like he saved that boy." Daniel felt a warmth drift through him, not the fierce burning of adrenaline, something softer, steadier. He crouched beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. "He saved all of us," he murmured. A breeze stirred the leaves overhead. Somewhere behind them, laughter rose, fragile at first, then blooming into something whole. Healing had a sound, he thought, and it sounded like this. Kate arrived later that afternoon, stepping onto the field with a stack of files tucked under one arm. She wore a simple blouse and blazer, her dark hair pulled back, eyes tired but gentle. Months of hearings, paperwork, and interviews had etched faint lines of worry at the corners of her eyes. But when she saw Daniel, they softened. Their conversation began the way it always did, quiet, unforced, like two people who had learned to value the space between words. They spoke about the children, the new K-9 unit Daniel was building, and the town's slow but steady shift toward trust again. Kate reached down to scratch Max's neck, her touch careful, respectful, as though acknowledging everything he had endured. "You've built something good here," she said softly. Daniel watched the children running, the sunlight catching on their small steps, and for a long moment he didn't answer. When he finally did, his voice was low. "We all did. You helped bring the truth home." Kate didn't respond with words, just a quiet look that held gratitude, understanding, and something tender growing at its edges. As the sun dipped lower, Max lay beside Daniel, head resting on his boot. Lily leaned against his shoulder, humming softly to herself. Kate stood nearby, arms folded lightly, breathing in the golden hour air. Daniel looked at them, this unexpected circle of people, and one steadfast dog, and felt a realization bloom slowly, like sunlight filling a room. Max had pulled him out of darkness when he'd lost his way. Lily had given him a reason to rise each morning. And Kate. She had returned his name to him, polished it clean of doubt. They were something like a family now, not bound by blood, but by the quiet courage it took to keep going. In a town once marked by suspicion, they had carved out a place where trust could grow again. And as the sky shifted to amber, Daniel whispered a promise only the wind and Max could hear. "We're home now." In the end, this story reminds us that even in the quietest years of our lives, hope can still find its way back to us. Many older hearts know the weight of loneliness, illness, and long nights with no one to hear the prayer. But like Daniel and Max, we can be lifted by unexpected kindness and the simple grace of being seen. If this touched your spirit, please share your thoughts in the comments. Pass this story to someone who needs comfort, and subscribe so you never walk this road alone. May God bless you with strength, health, and gentle days ahead.